Welcome to BookEnds Online Edition, produced by the Wadena County Historical Society and Traveling Storyteller in collaboration with the New York Mills Regional Cultural Center. This program is made possible by the voters of Minnesota through a grant from the Five Wings Arts Council, thanks to a legislative appropriation from the Arts and Cultural Heritage Fund. This program and others will be available on the website of the Wadena County Historical Society at www.wadenacountyhistory.org. The books of today's speaker, Ann Lewis, are available at www.travelandstoryteller.com. And I'm going to spell that just because there's no G. So it's TravelinStoryseller. Travelandstoryteller.com. And Gillette, your local bookseller. Today's program features Ann Lewis. She is the author of Ship Captain's Daughter. Did that come out backwards when you guys see it?
No, it looks good.
Okay. And Growing Up on the Great Lakes. The book is both biography and autobiography about the fascinating childhood of a young girl whose father was the captain of a ship. Let's welcome to our Zoom bookends, Ann Lewis.
Oh, nice to be here. And I want to welcome you to my study. Yes, you can see it has a theme. In back of me, there's a calendar with my father's ship on it, the Herbert C Jackson, which is still sailing, which is amazing because most of those kinds of ships are being scrapped and being replaced by 1,000-footers. This ship was 690 foot long, and he thought that was really something in his era, and so did we all. But now, the larger ones have replaced these ships, and they have also replaced the forward cabins, which were so distinctive and important in my life because the whole forward end, as we called it, the captain's quarters, were in the front and the engineers were in the back. And now on the new ships, the 1,000-footers, there's one cabin in the back. So that's a big change in shipping design. So it's really lucky and thrilling to have this ship still running. And it was refitted 2 years ago in Duluth. And I got to go on it with the new captain, Captain Berger, who graciously invited me. And I didn't even recognize, the quarters were reminiscent of what I knew, but the back end, as we call it, was one big computer lab. The chief's office, where he always had his coffee and cigarettes in those days, there was no sign of it. The watches that used to be kept every 4 hours, there would be people up around the night, are now gone. They have automatic signals that go off if something's wrong. So it's the whole industry has vastly changed. And I had to realize that when I thought I was writing initially about the sailing life, I had to come to realize I was writing about the sailing life of the past. Many things are the same. The shipping schedules are the same, many things, but many things are very, very different. And the pilot house also is it's all computer. So my dad had a little phone that he would crank up like, and it would go back to the chief. And now it's all buttons. And but one thing does remain about that ship. My dad said it was a humdinger of a ship. And the current captain agrees. He's now moved up to a 1,000-footer himself. But the ship has, and they're all different designs and they handle differently. And this one seemed to be very beloved almost. And people do bond with their ships, that's for sure. I'm trying to point, here is a picture of that same ship before it was a self-unloader. And now ships have their own unloading equipment, which they put on the deck, which I have to say is an aesthetic downturn because you see all this, it's big, bulky. This was taken before that happened. And this one is really fun because it was the very first ship of which my father was a captain. And you can see significantly the smoke was coal fired. And that was the first ship I took a trip on. We thought the captain's quarters were just the Taj Mahal. They were mahogany and beautiful. And today, that doesn't happen either. They're very nice, but they don't do the old woodwork and so on. So this is a significant picture, and it was painted for me by a man named David Hart in Toledo. I gave a talk there, and he found out about my dad's first ship, and bless his heart, he painted it and sent it to me. So welcome to my world, which is a sailing world. I still can't wait to go to Duluth whenever I get a chance. Can't wait to go to the pier. So it's still in my blood. And I do have a very favorite quote. And I bet it applies to you wherever you are. But it says, "We are the children of our landscape. It dictates behavior and even thought in the manner to which we are responsive to it." We are the children of our landscape. And I felt very distinctly that in Duluth, we were children of our landscape. When the lake thawed, my father left. When it froze, he came home. It dictated our lives. The horizon was always magnetic, and it had a lure to it. But I'm sure if you're in Wadena, your landscape is equally important. But I think it's fascinating how it can shape us, and I'm sure it shaped my father and his response to his environment. He went aboard ship when he was 16 as a summer job, as many young men in our region do. And some of them do it just for that purpose, and some of them get hooked. And he was one of them. He said after his time aboard ship, he went on as a porter, helping the cook, but he said, "I kept after the first mate to get up front. I wanted to get up front." He said, you're too young, but I said to myself, someday I'm going to get up in the pilot house and run that ship. And that was his dream, and that actually came to be. So my mission is to tell you a little bit of that kind of background history. I was an only child. I got to sail when I was 12 years old. It was the first time. I could not sail before that because my father became a captain when I was 9, and only captain's children at that time could go aboard ship. But you had to wait till you're 12 for obvious reasons, insurance and common sense in there, because it's a big high ship and you have to, children aboard are a little bit scary. So I want you to maybe get a sense a little bit of those Great Lakes. I know we can't all picture them exactly, but when I talk about, I grew up to the rhythm of the transport of iron ore. The rhythm of that was to leave Duluth, you get iron ore from the mines, put into the ships in Duluth, Superior, or Ashland, or any of those ports, and then go across Lake Superior, and then you get to the Sioux Locks. And in this world, it's very common to say, are you from up above or down below? And up above and down below simply mean up above the Sioux Locks or below the Sioux Locks. It's a very significant marker. Without the locks, there would be no shipping. In the beginning, I think iron ore was discovered in Michigan. So it was at first transported by schooners and then taken off, put in carts and brought around the falls and reloaded in schooners in the St. Mary's River. And then, of course, when the locks were dug about in the 1850s, that all changed. The Lake Superior is 23 feet higher than the lower lake, so you need to drop that far when you go through the lock. And the river is about 9 hours long. For a captain has to be up during all small water, like the rivers, docking, and so on. So in terms of that rhythm, my dad would pick up the oar, go across Lake Superior, down through the locks, and I say you'd either turn right and go down through Lake Michigan and to Chicago, would be a very common run for him, and back up, that would be 5.5 days. Or if you came through the Sioux, down the river, you go left through Lake Huron, Lake Michigan, Lake Erie. Buffalo would be the last port, so it could be Detroit, Sandusky, Cleveland, Buffalo. That would be 6.5 days. So that was his run, and that was our rhythm. Now, the trick of that was he would be home every 5.5 or 6.5 days, but it could be at 2 in the morning or 5 in the morning or 1 in the afternoon. And my dear mother and most of the sailing ladies met a lot of those ships no matter what the hour. If it was in the middle of the night, my grandparents would come and stay with me, or I would go there. So that was our life. And sometimes it worked out just great. Like my 8th grade graduation, he got home, but not quite for the graduation, but for the lead up. We picked lilacs together and brought him. And then boom, he had to be back. And that was the constant in the sailing world, which has not changed one single bit, is that you better not miss that ship. So that sailing time is a reality no matter what the era or what the ship. So that was really our life. The difference today is that my father got no vacations. No one did, of course, in that era. And now they sail 60 days on and 20 days off. My dad did get the first vacation in the fleet the year he retired, and he took us all to a Montana dude ranch. So it was that was a big deal. So that's just a little outline of the life. And then I thought I would just share with you, why did I write this? And one of the reasons is that a lot of people don't know about really the life. They know about the big ships. They know about where the Fitzgerald went down. Shipwrecks are, if you go to bookstores, there's just myriads of books about shipwrecks and divers who have found this and that. And who will ever get over the mystique of the Fitzgerald? Never, of course. My father knew Captain McSorley, was on a committee with him. Everybody in our community was touched by that. It was just amazing how everybody seemed to know someone. So it's totally understandable, but not a lot of people know about the inside life of the sailing community and how that went. So that was one of the reasons. But another emotional reason was this. Emily Dickinson said, and I think it was Emily Dickinson, said, all writing starts with a lump in the throat. And I love that, because no matter what kind of a writer you are, and you don't have to be published to be a writer. If you write a journal, I mean, I came from a family who wrote on everything, gum wrappers, anything they could find. They were reporters of a lot of things, and I call them writers. And what they wrote is interesting still. And during this time, I surely encourage people to do that, because even like, say, memoir is history, and it's important. But nothing really does happen, if you think about it, without that little lump. So I was going to share with you, I'm going to read a little bit about where that came from, the catalyst. You know how you can think about things for a long time, you know, I'm going to do that, I'm going to do that, and then kind of doesn't get done. And then boom, something hits you and you're like, okay, now's the time. So I'm going to start right with a bit of drama. And when my parents retired to Tucson, which seemed kind of odd, people think, what, water? And then you go to the desert. But my dad said it had the same kind of appeal. There was that long look, the horizon. He loved geography and the impact of it. So in that way, it was fitting. And we were there at Easter time, and a really interesting thing happened. He all of a sudden, the children were doing like Easter eggs and so on, and he was sitting by the sliding glass door, and he just kind of lapsed out into a reverie. And so this is what he said that I remembered. It was just after Easter that year, our first trip upbound in the spring, and we got into a blinding snowstorm above the Sioux. There was a 60-mile-per-hour wind and 20-foot seas, and we were getting blown farther and farther off course. He pointed to an imaginary chart on the tablecloth that was nearby, and he said, I got out the charts and the big magnifying glass, and I started to look for inlands or islands, reading the small numbers on the chart to check the depth. The closest bay was Wadena Bay, not an official shipping area, no lines designating shipping lanes anywhere near, but it was the only chance for Lee. And now, asterisk, Wadena Bay is about 15 miles from where the Fitzgerald went down. We all hear about nor'easters, but a nor'wester is almost the most dangerous because it comes all the way across Lake Superior. Not a tree, not a rock to stop it. And those can be very, very dangerous winds. So here he was in that situation. He said the waves were beating us up the ship pretty badly, and the hatches were starting to take on water. I looked again at the chart and made my decision. It's our only hope, I decided. We've got to try for the bay. And I knew that when we turned to go in, the wind would hit us broadside. We'd either ride it out or we wouldn't. I got on the intercom and told everyone what we were doing and told them to hang on tight to something, and we started to make the turn. The wind hit us full force on the starboard side. I hung on for dear life to the ship's telegraph as we kept tipping lower and lower until all I could see was water out of the port side window. I should go this way, port side, left, of the pilot house. We stopped and hovered for a second or two, and then a road wave bounced off the rocks and tossed us back the other way, rolling us back over on our starboard side until under my feet it suddenly felt light. And I said to myself, this is it, we're going over. And we just stayed there, pitched over on our side for what seemed like a long, long time. Suddenly, there was a momentary decrease in the wind, he went on, and the ship started to come back, slowly righting itself. A second later, another wave hit us across the stern, and we rode it into the bay. I rang up the chief, reversed the engines, and the ship finally floated to a stop. We dropped the anchors, and we sat there in the snowstorm all night. Oblivious to the children who were in the back yard, he said, when daylight came and the snow and wind had stopped, I saw that the bay was half a whit smaller than it had appeared on the chart, and the ship almost filled it up. I looked at how we had come in through the rocks in the dark. We had made it, but the crew was not impressed. When we finally made it to Duluth, everyone except the officers quit and got off. All those boys went back to the mines on the range or the farms along the South Shore from where they'd been recruited. One severe storm was enough for them. Their sailing days were over. And then he looked out the glass door at the desert and said, that was the one time in all of my years on Lake Superior that I thought I was gonna die. And I thought, this is a significant story. I had never heard my father tell it, and I had never heard him say he was afraid. So it made me think, you know what? Our life was rather unique. And I think I'm going to try to write about it. So that was the lump in my throat and the catalyst. And when I started thinking about it and thinking how I'm going to do this, looking through albums and pictures, and I've been away from the Twin Ports for a long time. And so I started contacting people who were still in the business, and I got a marvelous invitation by who is a retired Port Authority, Davis Hellberg, a really famous man in our neck of the woods, who said, why don't you come to a Propeller Club lunch? You can be my guest. I had just called him out of the blue, and I said, when is it? And he said, tomorrow. And I said, I'll be there. I didn't know how I was going to get there, but I knew I was going to get there. And I did. And he sat me next to what we called the Ancient Mariners in Duluth. There were 3 men, and they all knew my father, which he knew. And one of them, Gil Porter, said, he slipped me a note and he said, whatever you need, just let me know. And he became my very best friend. All those people are gone now. They're all legends. And I was so lucky to get to know them and have them help me. He read every single word in this book and changed some. I had referred to maps and he said, Missy, those are charts. I said, okay, I better get my sailing vocabulary tuned up. So the end of that was, I thought about it. I thought I was going to write about my dad. And then I thought, I don't know everything about my dad. He was a very grand, rather formal man, but he also had a tattoo on his arm of an anchor. And I thought, well, I might not know everything about him. And I thought, you know what? For authenticity, I need to write from my own perspective. And so that's what happened. I thought, I have to write from my experience of this life, of course, which included him. And so I wrote, and I read the first paragraph. I said, what is the bottom line in this? And this is it. The ship comes in and the ship goes out. As the daughter of a Great Lakes ship captain, I grew up to the rhythm of the transport of iron ore. From the arrival of the shipping orders in March to layup in December, from climbing the ship's ladder weekly to see my father while he was in port, to watching his ship disappear again over the horizon line, my life was dominated by the excitement, the loneliness, the drama, and the lure of the shipping industry and the water. And I maintain that no one stays in this life and profession after going through a storm, for instance, like my father told about, unless they are romanced by the lure. Now, there's a danger in romanticizing a life and leaving out the realities, but I also think it's a reality that there is a romance, because I don't think people who live this life can do it, all the rigors of it, without being in love with a piece of it. And that is the water, the sunsets, the drama. And so those I call mariners. I have also, shared just a little private peeve, is that sometimes people have a kind of a shady connotation to sailor. And I thought, the men I knew were dads and brothers and uncles, artists, musicians. My dad loved classical music and so on. And I got a little bit defensive about that. So I said, these were mariners. So that's just a little aside. So one of the things that we all know is that, for instance, if you marry your husband and they want to live in River Falls, you become a part of his life. And so my father's dream was to be a ship captain, and so we became a part of that life. And I say we were people of the lake, as all the shipping families were. We all lived the life together. So I say in my little book, drawn to the water and the big ships as a young man, my father followed a dream of becoming a Great Lakes ship captain, and he and my mother and I lived it out together in all its rich and varied and very demanding dimensions. So I hope to, in this little book, to tell what that life was like. How do you live a life in this kind of a rigorous setting? And the answer is we did. I have my very best friend growing up was one of 7. And she made a remark. She said, sometimes I think you've spent more time with your dad than I have with mine. And I thought that was a really interesting thing to think about, because once I was able to take trips, I was with my parents 24/7 in limited quarters. We ate together. We talked about everything together. We played cribbage together. So, you know, that same quality time, I think, really did apply. We were intensely apart and intensely together. So the next thing I wanted to share with you was what some of the drama and the good things about it. And that is epitomized for me in the book cover. So I'm holding that up. And this is actually, I'm going to also tell you a secret here. This is very much signifies my experience, like the highlight of my childhood. But this is not exactly me. It is my child. It is my daughter. And she is watching her grandfather now come in to the Duluth Pier. And so it's very much my experience, but it is, we thought, a charming picture. And when you work with a publisher, you go through all, 100 ways around the mile to get back where you started. So we started with this one through 100 other pictures and ended up with it in the end, because of all the other possibilities, like ships and lighthouses. Here I wrote a book of poems and it had this picture in, and that, there's myriads of wonderful pictures, but this was really it, if you're gonna really know what the life from a child's point of view. So I'm going to read a little bit about that. And I am going to start with, if you've been to Duluth and can picture the aerial bridge and the canal, I say, especially when I was a child, I used to love to go down to the pier and watch my father's ship come in. Now, this is absolutely the pinnacle experience. I mean, he did come in at 2 in the morning, but the best experience, and was my experience multiple times, was, the super best would be Saturday afternoon on a sunny, warm day with tourists, lining the piers. So that's what we're gonna focus on. So I used to love to go down to the pier and watch his ship come in. Ideally, we would be there much earlier in time to watch him break the horizon line. For a long time, the boat seemed to barely move. And then about after a half hour, it began growing in size, approaching slowly but steadily. And finally, it came in fast. "Get ready," Mom would say. "Here he comes." The tourists at the pier started running, some out to the lighthouse to watch the great ship enter the canal, while others sat right on the breakwater. Our favorite place was on the walkway by the Marine Museum. We watched proudly as the huge ship glided down the canal to tower above us. "Look up," Mom would say, and there would be Dad. He'd lift up the big black bullhorn with both hands and in a booming voice yell out, "Ahoy, mates! 40 minutes to the dock." And I'd yell back, "Ahoy, Papa!" So that was the best of the best. And then in Duluth, if you know its geography at all, we could actually watch the ship. If we went up on the Skyline Drive, we could watch him come through the bay and come out to West Duluth to the docks. When you come in, you can still see those docks, and then go for a visit. And when I was writing about this and thinking about what this life was like and what my life was like and what people didn't know about this life, I thought, well, one of the things even I at this point think was amazing was that we climbed the ladder to see him. Now, often he could get off if it was his watch. He wasn't always a captain. When I was this size, he was a first mate, which is the hardest job of ever because you have to load the ship. And if you don't load it right, it doesn't ride right. So it's very critical. But the second mates are learning the job and are very good. So if it's your hometown and you can get the second mate to take your watch, or to do part of the loading, that's super. You can get off. But many times that wouldn't work out, or someone would come aboard ship and he'd have to meet with them. So we would climb the ladder. So the next significant piece about the land life of this is this. To get aboard ship to see Dad, we had to climb the ladder. When I was young, my dad carried me up. He held me in the curve of his left arm, and with his right hand, he grabbed and let go, and grabbed and let go, lurching from rung to rung as we went up. At the top, he turned and let go of the ladder, jumping onto the landing and then down onto the deck. When I was older, I climbed the ladder by myself, pretending I was brave. My father bragged about it, but he always stood nervously at the iron platform that hung over the side of the ship, reaching out to catch me at the top. When I gave him my left hand, he pulled it toward him quickly, taking my right hand as I stepped onto the iron grate. Sometimes I still dream about it. That's true, because if you look down, the ship is not always snug up against the deck. It can sneak out a foot or two. And when you look down to put your foot on the landing, I say I could see that open space. And the oar drippings made the water rusty brown. And I knew if I fell, there would be no way to save me. I was always relieved to make it up. But during the whole time I was aboard, I worried about getting back down. And that's the truth. So the ups and downs of this life are really literal. And then the up was, we would always go in the galley, which always smelled like melted butter to me. And there would always be out the night lunch, because you had to have food out because people worked different shifts. If they didn't make it for dinner or whatever, there always had to be ample food, because everybody knew that a happy ship was a well-fed ship. So there was always donuts and roast beef. They called it, there was a big like cooler. You raised it up and there was always myriads of things in there. But oddly, my very favorite, because my mother wouldn't buy it otherwise, was bologna on toast with mustard. It was just, that was my shipping treat. And I have to tell you, the cutest thing, when I did one of these talks in outside of Milwaukee, for a treat they had made up toast and bologna with mustard. So that was one of the odd perks. So that's some of the land pieces. And I don't know how much time we have or reading. I know that one of the favorite things when I got to go my first trip, the first thing I did, my dad let me participate in the fire drill they used to have. And I got to blow all the whistles, you press and boop, boop, beep, boop, all over. So that was really fun. And then after a while, though, there's a lot of water and sky, and a lot of book reading, and Lake Superior is a long way across. And I discovered that the most fun place ever was the pilot house. And so I could sneak up there. Lots of captain's quarters have stairways that go right up to the pilot house. And so especially if my father was up, if we were going through the river, I would, no matter what time, once you go to board ship, there is no time. It's a 24-hour cycle. And you're constantly moving, so who cares if you're up all night? So just a little piece of that is, I say nighttime was the best time in the pilot house, when the radar and direction finder were lit and the two-way radio jabbered with shipping traffic. It was always a conversation. The men talked about the news and their families, their childhood and sports, and everybody smoked. Not anymore, but then that was just a reality. And they drank coffee and ate donuts. That's what I always associate with the pilot house, coffee and donuts. Donuts are standard items on ships because they really last. they're thick and they're good in humidity. Sometimes when it was warm, the doors on either side were latched open and everyone stopped talking as we sailed in the glow of the moon. All you could hear was the turning of the wheel and the lapping of the water on the bow. One night, Dad bet me I couldn't stay up all night, but I had to try. Right before sunrise, it was deadly quiet, and the night loosened around the edges. The blackness thinned, but it wasn't quite light. The smell was different, a little like fish. And now you could see the leftover bacon sandwiches from 2 a.m. that had gotten crusty on the windowsill and the fat had hardened. Sometimes they'd send back for sale. My dad loved bacon sandwiches. A wind came up, causing a little bounce to the ship, and it started to feel humid, and the horizon line became visible, as straight as it had been drawn with a ruler. And it was morning, and I had made it. So those were some of the fun perks of being together. So that is it. I can read a little more. We can talk. I had another favorite. I guess I could close with this. I had been gone. I actually went, I started out as a French major until I went to France. And then so I was gone for a summer, and I hadn't seen my dad for like 7 months. And he arranged it for me to take a last trip. It was to be my last trip, because you also, when you were, I think 21, your sailing days were over. And he had set that up. And so I got to sail with him once more. And I remember thinking, oh, I love this, because the ship, even when it's calm, a ship will be always, it goes like, you might not even see any ripples, but it's always moving, you know. So you get on, it's kind of, oh yeah, this is what it's like. And I remember I was in the passenger quarters, which were lovely. You know, they had tie back drapes, and I thought, oh, this is fabulous. And so it was nighttime again. We were just approaching the Sioux. Dad had to be up. He would be up now for 9 hours to get through the river. And I went out on deck with him. So this was my favorite moment, and it's on the back of the book too. When the moon came up, we began to see the outlines in the distance of several ships starting to get in line to go through the river leading up to the Sioux locks. Standing out on the bow, Dad made me look for the North Star just to make sure I remembered how to find true north. Since ancient times, he said, Polaris has been the sailor's star. We now have modern navigational devices such as the gyro compass, but those depend on human power sources that can fail. The North Star never goes out, he laughed. It's still a sailor's best friend. He pointed out Cassiopeia, important because it's one of the constellations visible year-round in the northern sky. We stood there silently in a bowl of stars, and the ship rocked gently in the night wind. It's so awesome out here, I said. It feels like we're floating through time and space. We are, Dolly, he said, still gazing upward. We are. So I think that's the lure. That's what keeps sailors sailing. And that's what kept me a ship captain's daughter. This is taken several years ago when that ship came in, went just amazingly, miraculously. We were down with my sister-in-law showing her the canal, and someone said, oh, a ship is coming in, the Herbert C Jackson. So that's me before and after.